I just won't answer.
All right, we are live. So we'll just wait a few minutes here so that our viewers can see the notification to join us here for today's broadcast. But thank you all for joining us today. We're connecting from the Siena Art Institute here in Siena, Italy. And I'm here with Mr. Rodney Veal, who is joining us from Dayton, Ohio in the United States. So thank you, Rodney, for joining us on a busy day. As we give our audience just a few minutes to join us here, let me just mention that today's online talk is part of our ongoing series at the Siena Art Institute StARTers Live. For all Tuesdays in the months of April and May, we're focusing on the topic of art and education, with a special focus on fostering creative and critical thinking. And to briefly introduce today's speaker, Rodney Veal is an independent choreographer and multidisciplinary artist based in Dayton, Ohio. He serves as adjunct faculty and the career community coordinator at Sinclair Community College. He's a graduate of Eastern Michigan University with a BS in political science and visual arts. He received his MFA in choreography from The Ohio State University. Rodney currently serves on the board of trustees of Ohio Dance as president and on the boards of Levitt Pavilions Dayton, Homeful, Dayton Live, and YSO. He's the recipient of several Montgomery County Arts and Cultural District grants and fellowships, including an MCACD fellowship for 2010-2011, and he was one of 5 artists, including myself, chosen for the Blue Sky Dayton Project, an artist residency program that was held in collaboration with the University of Dayton. So that was my first chance to have the privilege to work alongside him. And Rodney has choreographed and presented numerous performance installations, recent notable projects being Reveal, 5 Zones of Beauty, presented at the Springfield Museum of Art in 2011, and the Ghetto installation at the University of Dayton's Art Street in 2015. Rodney can currently be seen as the host of the Emmy Award-winning television series The Art Show, which is currently in production for its 12th season and can be viewed on the YouTube channel of The Art Show Think TV and CET. So as always, we welcome our viewers to use the comment section of this broadcast to interact with us, leave us questions that we'll be very happy to respond to at the end of the presentation today. So now let's hear from Rodney, who can give us a glimpse into some of his work.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Lisa. That's so bizarre when you hear that introduction. It's like, that's a lot. That's a lot. But thank you. And then thank you for inviting me. And I love the fact that we have this connection through the Blue Sky Artist Residency. And that was its whole purpose, was to bring artists together from all disciplines. And so I'm grateful that we've stayed in touch and stayed in that friendship zone. So this is lovely. So, okay, I guess I'm going to share a little bit about my life and art practices and being an artist and an educator. And so I'm going to dive right in. Is that good? Good? We're good?
Yes.
Super cool. All right. I'm going to switch over to slides. Might I suggest, that's a phrase that has stuck with me since my graduate school days, as a phrase a phraseology that comes from having the opportunity to work on a project that was in celebration of William Forsythe, as he was receiving the Wexner Prize at the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus. And we had an opportunity in the dance department for a group of us to work for 10 weeks with the dancers from his company and work with, and eventually we got a chance to actually meet and work in the studio process with Mr. Forsythe, which is, I might as well I've crossed that off my bucket list. And one of the things that his phraseology of like how to suggest corrections or how to suggest going in a different direction was, he would always say, might I suggest? He would never say, from a dictatorial or hierarchical standpoint, I am William Forsythe, I'm a genius, he would say that, might I suggest you add this, or might I suggest you think about or consider this, but never with the intentionality of shaping or forming it within his own personal or realm of reference to art making. And so I've always used that, like when I'm going into a critical analysis, or we're going into a critique or a study of someone's work, or studying student work, to say, might I suggest you consider this, or might I suggest you watch this? And so that was always my kind of way, an introduction and viewpoint to kind of seeing how to make work, and it's stuck with me this entire time. And so, and as Lisa said, I'm a multidisciplinary artist, so I'm working primarily in all different realms. I really pick up skills and tools as I go along in the process, and with the pandemic and with us all being in lockdown, I've kind of have gone back. I've taken the time. I've had the time to actually kind of deep dive and explore collage work. And this is an example of one of the pieces, and using paper and using materials and reclaiming materials that are around me. So a lot of, like, when I hear that, might I suggest, I would say that to myself, like, Rodney, why don't you consider maybe doing this with materials in your home, or what's readily available? And that's kind of how I approach the art making process. And so I always think about, as an educator, that in order for us to foster that in other people, and to foster that in students, and to foster that even in our audiences, is that we have to come from a basis and standpoint of these two statements, and that's being human and being honest. And being human, being that you are an amalgamation, you are a mix of so many disparate sort of parts as a human being. You're filled with contradictory emotions. You're filled with contradictory thoughts. You're filled with things that don't seem to fit, but yet they are a part of you. And so, how you should always embrace it, and from an honest standpoint, that this is who you are. And so that helps. That also helps in the student making process, if they know that you're telling them, "Hey, I'm human too. You're human. As creatives, we're not super beings. We're not extraordinary. We're all seeking and searching meaning. We're all seeking and searching a way to express ourselves and to be seen and to be heard and acknowledged. That is being human. That is something that's universal. And so, and being honest about it. And some days that your art making process might suck. that day you might walk in and you may not feel like putting paint to canvas, or deep diving into an intellectual investigation of some of materiality, or collaborating on that day. But that doesn't mean that you're opposed to it the next day. But if you're honest up front, but saying, hey, this may not be as productive of a day, or that it may be you're heading in a different direction because the day is filled with something else, that could be really, really important to share. And that manifests itself in the work having like dimensions and shapes and form. And I really strongly believe that, because the humaneness of what we do has to come through, and we have to acknowledge, because we are living in a time of trauma, and we have students and artists that are coming into spaces and audiences to see art, are coming from now this added layer that is happening all around the world. And so I talk about the fact my interests are varied, so therefore, like, I talk about like how and so these are examples of my work. And so me carving through space and working with dancers to create movement, doing photoshopped images and photography and working in that sort of style, the dance for film. So I'm like actually videotaping and forming. I love fashion. I mean, people have a tendency to think frivolity of fashion, but their fashion serves as a touchstone and a cornerstone to identity and culture. And so I made that, as well as collaborating with Brianna Rhodes, who's absolutely stunning to work with. And you'll see an example of the work later. But all of that, for the longest time, for me as an art maker, I always felt like I had to categorize it. And there was a moment in 2007 when I was applying for grad school, and after having danced on the stage, and I was looking for the next transition in my life, where I went to when I was applying for grad school, they said, you have this interest in political science and visual art, but we're not seeing it in your work. Why is this not all pulling itself together? And I said, well, then for the next 3 years, you're going to help me figure that out. And so that's what I mean about like the notion of we are all filled with other interests and other ideas and other thoughts. Can they inform the current practice? Can it be applied to other practices? And so I'm always going to be an advocate for someone saying, I'm drawing, but I'm thinking about this. It's like, might I suggest digital technology using it? So you're always trying to kind of inform it, to take it and expand it. And that's what gets to the multiplicities. And I think we are, and the multiplicities, there are no set number of multiplicities. Was just kind of like the universe, is an ever expanding space. And so therefore, some people have untapped multiplicities because they've never considered it. And so we as educators, I look at it from a movement base, but also from a visual arts space, and I have not taught in a visual arts sense. Performative art, I have done in a collaboration with someone at the University of Dayton. Is that how can that inform? Can your love of hockey or your love of soccer or football, if we want to call it from a non-American perspective, can that be informed and infused within your work? Can a love of food and a love of communal gatherings, can theater, so all of your interests, things that we have to let go of this notion that something is an interest, is a hobby. An interest is an integral part of who and what you are, and will inform how you see and view making work and collaborating, and so that the idea expands itself. And so it's never like this is the most concrete, beautiful idea and I'm going to stick with it. It's like, let's step back and see how can it expand out further. And it can. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't. But you got to make the attempt. And so that's a part of it. And I picked up the camera with when I was an undergrad back in the 80s, pre-digital, without a doubt. But also, too, these images were taken after grad school. So this is after really deep diving and exploring theater lighting but the concepts of the body of the body in space was already formed from movement-based practices. But then the dramatic lighting, color, shape, and form also comes from the fact that I'm a voracious reader of magazines. I gobble up magazines and comic books and graphic novels. And so can this all kind of go in and inform your work? And then you find that out when you're unpacking it, that these things all come into play. And another thing that I think about when I think about William Forsythe, because he was a part of my thesis that I defended for grad school, is the notion that everything knowledge that you acquire is a tool. And that tool will be used at some point. You don't know when or where, but as long as you have the tool in your tool belt, your goal is to fill up that tool belt with as many tools as possible, which is not necessarily about mastery, not necessarily about I am a genius, not necessarily about I'm going to make myself incredibly wealthy from the process. The tools are there for you to get to the place of discovery and being human and being honest with yourself and being honest with the world. So the more tools you have, the better it is. The greater, well, better it is. Let's strike that, rewind. The more there's a chance and an opportunity to go down a really cool, interesting path of discovery. Okay, and so you're constantly exploring. One of the things I love about William Forsythe and his work, and if you get a chance, and even as artists who are maybe working in other disciplines, I also believe that we should be looking at other disciplines of how their practices. Bring them into the studio. If you know someone's a choreographer or dancer, have the dancers come in and work with the visual artist. Get them moving. Get them so that they see the body and how the body moves and how their body moves in a different way. Visual artists could go into the studio so that dancers can see framing, so they understand what framing looks like and composition, and so that they understand that that's also informing movement patterns. So the tools, how do you use the tools? This was an image, and Lisa, you'll probably remember this. This is the space that Catherine used, Catherine Mann, and we had thrown paint, and this was afterwards, and I just came in with a group of dancers and we created choreography just on the fly. I just went, I went and bought these multicolored costumes to kind of fill in, and and we had used an abandoned space for it, and I just thought there was not the intention of making this to. I don't know if I can be honest with you, I filmed it, and I don't think anyone's ever seen the film except me. So at some point I'm thinking I should probably show this at some point, but it was for me to kind of test things out, to see, like, groups of people moving and engaging in space. And so, like, again, about the tools. This is where Catherine and Shapong Lu and I came together and collaborated back in 2012. And I was still dancing at that point. And at my age, I was like, but I'm working with a group of dancers. And so we were working with technology, which you can't see, where we're using components from the Kinect to pick up on movement-based signaling to the Kinect that would trigger a soundscape that Shapong had created that was being monitored at a computer station with a hookup with the sound and amplification. And so Catherine created the space, and then we're dancing, and she's actually off to stage right, stage left. She's painting in the style and format, and we were moving through that. And so we started off in pristine white, and the black started to appear from her painting surfaces. So, that sort of sense of it, working in that sort of collaboratory way changes the dynamics of what you see and you hear and what you experience. And so that's why having as many tools as possible, and then allowing other people to their tools added to your tool belt, creates just a never-ending stream of surprises. So, and I know it's corny and cliched, but joy. Operate from a place of joy. We know that not necessarily, there may be moments where it's not a thing. We are living in traumatic times, and as an African American, really, really traumatic times in dealing with race and justice. But there's also still a joy of my culture and a joy of my presence and persona as being a Black man. And so can that manifest itself in the work as well, where it is constantly, where there are constant reminders of the ugliness of life, there are still moments of joy that can be parsed out of it. And so that voyage of discovery, that, can be a tool, that joy and beauty and pleasure can inform one's work. And I try even, and you'll see it in an example later, like where you can, about Black beauty and the beauty of the Black female body and presence in our world. And so that sort of thing. This is the exhibit, 5 Zones Reveal, 5 Zones of Beauty. And just, I played around with the notion of here was my small attempt at a museum exhibition. And this was I was approached right out of grad school. And we're talking an MFA with no intentionality of thinking about the artist space in this terms. Blue Sky got me thinking that way when we were in Blue Sky, but really thinking about space. And so I did 5 channels of video, and what you see on the wall, and that's Charlotte, who I will forever be indebted as a curator, who just allowed me to go into this space. Those paintings on the wall were created in the museum as a part of the performance. So this was a process of accumulation. So we started with just the 5 channels of video, the 5 different zones of beauty, and then I was adding work. I was adding performances that inform making of work that then showed up in the museum. So I challenge the audience to keep coming back every week to see, like, there's a performance. He's doing this. He's adding materials. I'm making stuff. And so, and then not with the intention of like, this is a definitive point of view. I wanted to go on this path of exploration to see, okay, after it's over, what am I saying? What's going on? And I'm still unpacking, and that was in 2011. But it's still also informing the channels and pathways of work continuing. This is the ghetto exhibit, and I took a love of fashion and the notion of the word ghetto, which the University of Dayton has a really great program with Art Street that allows for collaborating with college students to make work. And so I love a fashion, and we came up with this concept of ghetto as a retail installation. So it looks and mimics a store. And so we had products, but the products spoke to the danger of using this word in such a cavalier way. And it has the word ghetto has a fraught history, not just in the United States, but in Europe and in Italy. And so it became a thing where people came in dazzled by, oh my God, look at these mannequins with, and I taught myself to sew a ball gown and dresses. Just letting you know, I ran with what I knew, and I brought a group of people together to do it. But in essence, so it kind of surprised them when they would see things talking about the disparities in wealth and wealth income and inequality and places where people were the higher murder rates and things like that. And so because the University of Dayton called its residents around the campus for students, they called it the ghetto. But you're charging $33,000 a year for tuition. You're not living in the ghetto. You're living in a land of privilege, and you should never call the land of privilege ghetto. So that was my pun and take on that. And working with them was really great. It was another collaboration. And then it's like my whole thing is like represent the times, which representing the times means where you're at right now. Where we are right now is we're in the midst of a global pandemic. Every day it changes. We're seeing a rise in in wealth and inequality. We're seeing a rise in climate change. We're seeing social injustice and racial issues coming to the forefront. We're seeing things coming to a day of reckoning. So you can represent the times within the work, but not with the intentionality of it being nihilistic or defeatist. And so that's where my work is now. It's like, I had this year to create this dance for film that you're about to see. And what struck me, I had an opportunity to create this for TEDx Dayton. And that was, Breonna Taylor's death. And the chance to collaborate with a Breonna Rhodes, who's also named Breonna Taylor, Breonna Rhodes, sharing a name. And we were talking about this in the process of creating this. And this magazine came out, and that phrase, "A Beautiful Life." And so we didn't want it to manifest itself as a representation of the Black trauma, of trauma to the Black body. And so how do you celebrate this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Black woman and her life as being beautiful? And it is. And then Amy Sherrill created this image of her. So she painted her in a way that creates a sense of mystery and a sense of beauty. I really do think that even though it was created for the magazine, it was created as a painting. And I think we're going to be coming to this painting a lot. It's a lot to take in. So I'm going to share the video of when you say her name, and take it away.
All right. right. We'll pause it there, but we could keep on watching this. It's really wonderful to see at least a glimpse into this work, and to hear as well. You were saying that the music was also composed specifically for this project. Is that right?
Yeah, right. And it was Josh Strange, so I give major shout outs and kudos. And this is a 19-year-old music composer.
Hmm.
I mean, the sophistication of his sound was just pretty amazing. He's 19 and the world is ready for it. And so it was really lovely to have that sort of collaboration with Brianna and Josh to create it. So.
Oh, it's wonderful to see. Well, we have a few questions that have come in from our viewers, questions and comments as well. For example, our director, Miriam, was saying that she loves what you say about honesty and being human, one and all. And she also asked a question, as you talk about acquiring tools, she'd like to ask how you teach students about the importance of failure in the creative process.
Oh, wow, that's a good one, because it's I think a lot of times we front load the creative process with the concept that it's going to fail. Mm-hmm. So you already created so if you don't start with the notion of one saying, this is not about success or failure from the beginning, this is about exploring it to a conclusion, and let's see what happens. Because what we do is I mean by fronting it with failure, is like, well, I've got to make this work so it gets on the wall so I can get into this, and there's like all these things. If that doesn't happen, then I'm not going to get into this school. I'm not going to get this, and my life's ruined, right? Is it really? And so so the question you have to ask is like, hey, let's just do this for exploration, and if it's not to where you would like it to be, let's go in another direction. So therefore, it's not a failure. You just set it aside, and you just, or it doesn't get used. I use an example. B.B. Miller creates 3 to 4 hours of movement material for a 10-minute piece that never sees the light of day. So we have to start thinking about that in terms. Because we're so afraid in other practices, the cost of. Like, well, in the end, wouldn't you rather have a work that you're satisfied with, a work that speaks honestly to what you're trying to do? So, yeah, okay.
Oh, that's a great response. And it makes me also, this idea of failure relates to an situation I sometimes face with students who are feeling a bit overwhelmed with, for example, students who come from abroad to study here in Siena. It can be a bit overwhelming. How do I respond to my newfound surroundings? But also, even if students are creating in their hometown, sometimes the world, especially these days, can be so overwhelming. I think sometimes young artists especially feel, who am I to respond? How do I even enter into this conversation with my art? And are there ways that you work with students to try and help them get over that sense of either feeling not entitled to share their voice, or just feeling a bit overwhelmed with, how can I respond to this?
Well, part of it has to be, I think I'm looking at, I can see the comments, Miriam, just so you know. Like sharing that, there's, technology, you can see it all. Is that you share, this goes back to the human and being keeping it humble, human and honest. You've got to share when you have messed up. You have got to give it. You've got to get over they can only see the perfect side of me as the person that's educating them. Show your failures. If you demonstrate that I had this failure, and we all have them. I have a piece of choreography that I thought was going to be so fantastic. And everyone who was a good friend, who I trust her opinion, said, Rodney, that was not good. The only thing that worked in that was that pas de deux and that solo. And I'm like, but there were all these group movements. She goes, just don't ever do it again. And I'm like, wow. And so I know, the honesty of, I respected her for the honesty. It stung, and it kind of, but you've got to be able to demonstrate that you can overcome the failure. If you don't show your failures, how are they going to know that someone can't overcome a failure? There has to be an example. So.
And it's good to have people around you who can offer that kind of, tough love in a sense of,
It was a little rough.
criticism, but that's coming from a loving and caring place.
Loving, caring place. But I think really the biggest thing is you have to demonstrate where something was a failure for you personally, and how you felt about it and how you overcame it. And some people you can even be honest and say, I'm still not over it.
Mm-hmm.
That in of itself speaks volumes. So, yeah.
Oh, definitely. There was a question that just came in from Alex, who was saying that fashion art often overlap. For instance, many top gallery owners and collectors are involved in the fashion business. Have you worked on any projects with fashion companies?
No, I haven't. Well, part of it is that there are not a lot of fashion industries in Dayton that you can connect to. But I've always thought about that component, especially because I do a lot of things that are performative. So I'm really, how do I costume? How do I dancers or myself in some sort of installation piece that I'm creating? So I would love to at some point. I think that there's some things that could translate themselves. And so I just, I'm open. That's the other part of it. I'm open to it. So that's a good question. And and fashion and art really do overlap because both are reflective of the times. I think, when you see what people are making, when you see what people are wearing, they intersect. And it's intersect not just in the sense of, oh, I'm fashionable, but this is a statement about where we are. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been to it.
Oh, and definitely with your other gig outside of being, professor, you also are the host of the art show. So of course you're having to be very fashionable in that persona,
which is already bizarre in and of itself, Lisa. And that was not that came about. I always thought that I came about because I was talking about the art making process and collaboration, and I was giving a speech about it. And it was a TEDx. It was a TED Talk, the local version of TED. And the television station saw me. So me talking about the collaborative process led to, hey, would you be interested in auditioning? Now I didn't get it because I had to audition. There were 2 other people that were up for it. So, but I won. If we're going to talk about winning and losing, which I hate and horror, but they offered it to me and I ran with it. And so, but I also, I took it because in fun, I got to play with clothing. They were like, you can dress how you want to dress. And I'm like, I don't have to wear a suit. I was like, I asked that question. I didn't. So it's great. So it's cool. I hear the little bell. Is that a chime?
Sorry, it's the doorbell here at the school. Oh, so my apologies. Yes,
yeah,
it's probably though a sign that we probably are needing to wrap up though for just the broadcast here in the interest of time. But thank you so much though for sharing a glimpse into your very multifaceted work, as well as thank you to our viewers for sharing your comments and questions as part of today's broadcast. And I'll mention, if you are intrigued by Rodney and his work, definitely you can check out the art show, which he hosts through Think TV. They have a YouTube channel, so you can see a lot of episodes into also other creative people who are part of the greater Dayton area. So it's really very much worth checking out. And I'll also just remind our viewers for this series, StARTers Live, you can join us here next week. We will be hosting Michael Eldridge, who is a creativity coach, painter, photographer. So he'll be our speaker the same time next week. So we hope you can all join us for that. So thank you all so much. And thank you once again, Rodney. It's been really wonderful having the chance to talk with you today.
It's my pleasure. This is so much fun. This is great. It's super cool.
All right. Take care, everyone. Ciao.
Goodbye, world. Goodbye, world. In a positive way.